Hi everyone. My father and I always talk about the progress of the Japanese economy. He tends to bring up his experience when he started working in Japan and how Japan is right now. I thought these discussions were always fascinating. I thought we should try to formally record them, perhaps in a podcast format, which is popular nowadays. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to my father, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you for that introduction, Ricky. Basically, my name is Robert Rowland, and I came to Japan in '87.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Japan to study, to do graduate school,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to be a part of the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say a part of the experiment, as an undergrad in Montreal, I was fascinated by Japanese economic development and the story of the Japanese tiger. And so as an undergrad studying economics, I was reading books by Ezra Vogel. You might have heard The Enigma of Japanese Power.
Mm-hmm.
There was also James Abiglin, who did Kaisha, and James Follows, who wrote books more like us and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And these books made me very excited about wanting to be a part of the Japanese experiment. So with that in mind, I came to Japan, and I thought, also as an undergrad in Japan, I was very interested in labor economics.
Mm-hmm.
And labor economics in particular, you might have heard of Gary Becker. Gary Becker is a Nobel laureate economist from the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote something called the Rotten Kid Theorem.
What's that?
And the Rotten Kid Theorem is basically, it looks at the spoilt kid. You know, you have this idea of a spoilt kid who acts out of self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
But in his context, spoilt kid, even though he acts out of self-interest, he realizes that the wealth and the prosperity of the family is vital to his own well-being. So he works to protect that.
I see.
And in the case of Japan, we had people like James Abiglin, who was at Sophia University, Jochi, where I was going to be a graduate student until I realized that the programs were only taught in English, so I wanted to study in Japanese. But I met him several times, and I was fascinated by his view that the Rotten Kid Theorem could be adapted to Japan.
How so?
Well, basically, he said that, you know, Japan has this lifetime employment. You've heard of Shushin Koyo.
Of course, yeah.
And they have basically the seniority system with the Nenko Joretsu,
Of course.
internal hiring. This is more of a story of the past. But the view at the time was that Japan was so successful because they could invest in their own employees. If you have somebody who's going to stick around with you for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, then it pays to invest in them. And if you invest in them, presumably you'll have a higher return, more efficient capital, more efficient human capital, and more productivity. And so basically I wanted to be a part of that experiment. So what we did, or what happened, is that we looked at Japan, and when I looked at Japan, we saw that, yeah, you know, they spend more time training them. Your salaries are very low. I was a part of the experiment, so I understood very well. Their salaries are very low to start with, and you really don't get the payoff until 10, 15 years after you've been in the company. But in return, the company will rotate you around different divisions, will give you much experience. If you're going to be a key player in management in the future, they might think, well, this person should work in the HR department for a while because he has to know all the people in the company. So I wanted to be a part of that experiment. And I thought it was very interesting compared to the US system, which I would basically describe it as a free agent system. You know, if you're a good performer, you perform very well, you get rewarded very quickly, and if they don't pay you for your performance, then you go off to the next highest bidder.
Right.
So that's the part of the system that I wanted to be with.
The American one's more like sports, I guess.
Yeah, but it's very true to the situation in Japan.
I see. So how was the experiment?
Well, again, before I came to Japan, I had worked in Canada in the Rocky Mountains, and I worked there for 3 years, and I just noticed every year, you know, the Japanese, they seemed to be more and more Japanese coming to Canada. It was like doubling every year. And have you ever heard of the Plaza Accord?
Something about the currency, right?
Yeah, it was a Plaza Accord. It was in September, I think it was 85, at the Plaza Hotel. And the finance ministers basically got together because the U.S. said that the U.S. dollar was too strong. So they got together to reduce the value of the U.S. dollar and conversely to help the Japanese dollar appreciate. And as a result of that, the Japanese yen went from I think was it about 240 yen before that,
Wow.
to about 120 yen within 2 or 3 years.
Wow, that's drastic.
Yeah, yeah. So that's when I arrived in Japan, and I arrived in Japan in this atmosphere where the whole place seemed giddy. The economy was doing really well. You know, you'd go down to Ginza and they'd have like 3 taxis parked side by side, half a mile down the street. It was just incredible. There was so much vitality. And later on, you know, for example, we had the story of Sony. You know, the Sony bought Columbia Pictures.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard of that. And of course, we had Matsushita Panasonic. They bought Universal Universal Pictures. And we also had, of course, the famous one about Mitsubishi Estate buying Rockefeller Center. So this was really the zenith of the Japanese economy around 87 to 90, when everything was booming and Japanese people felt really rich.
They were rich enough to start buying companies overseas.
Oh, they were rich to buy companies overseas. Well, let me tell you this. For example, not only the companies, but people were rich too. You know, for example, at that time, Japan was 14% of global GDP. You know,
That's huge.
That's huge. And you know what it is today?
What, 5-6%?
4%.
4%.
And that year when I came, Japan had just achieved the highest per capita GDP in the world, about $22,000.
Wow.
Just to give you some perspective, Korea was about $5,500 and Taiwan was about $4,000.
So I guess Japan had 4 times the Korean GDP per capita then.
Exactly. And also, there were a lot of people coming to Japan because they wanted to be a part of the experiment. So you had a lot of people from Ireland coming to Japan, new graduates for Ireland and IT and things like that. And the reason they were coming is because the average income in Ireland was $11,000. So, you know, they could basically double their income by coming to Japan.
That's great for them. And I guess they became Japanese in a way that they followed the lifetime employment as well.
That's correct. And so, let me give you another example. For example, in Japan, the minimum wage was about 500 yen an hour.
Okay.
And when I came from Canada, I think we were getting 500 yen was, by the way, about $4. And when we were coming from Canada, it was about $4, which was about $3 US at the time. The minimum wage in Korea was only about $1.
Oh, wow.
So in real terms, Japanese were doing much better than the rest of the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very rich economy then. So what you're saying is that the Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Irish, they were involved in some kind of economic arbitrage.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. You know, as an economics student, you're basically interested in nominal income, you're interested in real income, and purchasing power parity.
That's an interesting term. Could you explain what purchasing power parity is for the rest of the listeners?
Well, basically, it's taking a person's income in one country and translating it into another country to see whether the same amount of yen could buy the same amount of products in another country. So, for example, when you go to another country, you say, well, look at the price of houses here, look at the price of houses in Japan. That's hard to compare. But if you look at the price of a movie or price of a taxi, you can basically say, well, for this trip in Japan, it would cost me 500 yen, and here in New York, I'm paying $5 or $10 or $20. My favorite measure for comparison is the Big Mac.
Oh yeah, that's famous.
Yeah. So you know, I was always amazed that in Japan, when I came in '87, you know how much a Big Mac cost?
Maybe 300 yen?
A little bit more, maybe about 370 yen.
Okay.
And in Hong Kong, a Big Mac cost $5 Hong Kong. That was about 80 yen.
Okay, wow. Oh.
So if you were earning 500 yen an hour, you could buy more than one Big Mac for every hour of work, right?
Yeah.
But if you took that 500 yen and went to Hong Kong, you could buy about 6 Big Macs.
Oh, wow, you'd be pretty full then.
You'd be full, and you'd have a very strong purchasing power parity.
Right.
So I enjoyed purchasing power parity, and I enjoyed to compare it to the other countries. And that is why Japan at that point seemed relatively strong. But after 20 years of deflation and weak real household income growth, that purchasing power parity has started to decline.
So if you're Japanese, you can't buy as many Big Macs in Hong Kong anymore.
Actually, I think the price of a Big Mac in Hong Kong is almost the same as the price of a Big Mac in Japan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But it's still better than the U.S., where I think you pay about $6 for a Big Mac.
Apparently.
In Scandinavia, you're going to pay between 6 and 8 or something like that. And I think in Switzerland, you're paying $9. So the average, the minimum income in Japan is now it's about 1,200, 1,300 yen. You're getting basically one Big Mac for that in Switzerland. But that's just one way to measure wealth and income.
I see. So it seems like there's many ways of measuring wealth and income.
Yeah, I mean, basically you can measure wealth and income as a store of wealth or the income that people are receiving. And let me give you some examples to start with before we go through that. Just a bit of an anecdote for you, okay?
All right.
When I was an analyst in covering electronics around the year 2000, I was covering companies like Canon and Ricoh, Nikon, what have you. And I was amazed that we saw that China was becoming one of the biggest, if not the biggest market for SLR cameras for these people.
Really?
And an SLR camera costs about $1,000, $2,000 even then. Do you know what the average per capita GDP of China was at the time?
It wasn't very high back then, was it?
It was only about $1,000.
Okay, and they could still afford that.
Well, even on the southern part of the country where they had 300 million people, who are supposedly the richest, their average per capita income was $2,000 to $4,000. So we're talking about Shanghai, Guangzhou, Fujian, and so that I couldn't figure out how could these people with the relatively low, actually quite low incomes, be buying all these SLR cameras.
How could they?
Well, it's just psychology. If your income is doubling every year, then in 4 years, 5 years, you're going to expect to have twice the income. So you're saying, I'm going to be able to afford that. If I can afford it in 4 or 5 years, why don't I buy it now? Conversely, in Japan, where we were actually quite rich, you would say, well, my gosh, we have deflation now. I have losses on the stock market. Again, real household income is declining. I'm worried about my job. And most importantly, I'm worried about my pension. And so at that point, you'd say, well, maybe I won't buy that SLR camera. So that's the irony. You had the Chinese people whose average income were $4,000 or $5,000, and the Japanese whose average income was about $25,000 saying, I'll wait. And the Chinese were saying, I'll buy. And there's other examples, and this really hit home when I was reading it the other day. In New York, well, of course, New York's a very expensive place.
It is.
But the Amazon workers were striking, and these were, I guess these were the fulfillment workers or what have you in the warehouse. And their average income, their salary was like $23 an hour, and they wanted $30 an hour. And they had forecast that if they got extra overtime, they'd get close to $80,000 a year. And there was another, that reminded me of another story of UPS. Have you heard of UPS?
They also raised their wages?
Yeah, UPS is the U.S. Postal Service. And their drivers had a strike about 3 years ago. And in the contract, which ends next year, the drivers will get an average hourly salary of $49 an hour.
Oh, wow, that's pretty high.
$49 an hour. And then if they include overtime, they basically can expect to have an annual salary of about $135,000 a year.
Wow.
So $135,000 for a UPS driver. And in Japan, of course, you'd think, okay, so what does a Japan Post driver make? And the most experienced Japan Post driver will probably make about 6 million yen a year. So if you factor in the currency differences, the difference is incredible.
Wow, I guess people are getting paid more in the States than people are in Japan.
Exactly, and of course in Japan, we can compare like for like with Amazon, and I would be very surprised if Amazon workers in Japan are getting any more than 1,500 or 2,000 yen an hour. And remember that most of those fulfillment warehouses are outside of Greater Tokyo, where the minimum wage is actually lower. In Tokyo it's about, I guess, 1,230 yen or something like that. In Chiba or other prefectures it's 1,150 or so. It's almost 10% less. So what I'm trying to say is that the absolute minimum wage is much lower, or the absolute level for basically the same job is much lower in Japan than in many other countries.
Wow.
Let me give you one more example. Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. There was I met this guy in Iceland who was from West Africa. He was from Cabo Verde. I don't know if you've heard of Cabo Verde.
I've never heard of it.
I hadn't heard of it either until I met him. And so you might not realize it that Cabo Verde, of course, it's an island off of West Africa. It's very poor, and their average per capita GDP now is about $6,000. So we know that it's a poor country, but we've also learned from the World Cup that they're very good at soccer.
Sure.
So they're a poor country that's very good at soccer, but he basically went to Iceland to work in a nursing home so that he could get a higher income. Like we call in Japan, dekasagi rodosha.
Sure, sure.
And so he went to Iceland, and his income as a very basic nursing home worker was close to 600,000 kroner a month. That's about 800,000 yen a month, or almost 10 million yen a year. And I thought, my gosh, that's an incredible salary. He's just working in a nursing home. And those nursing homes in Japan would probably be paying you, I don't know, 1,500 yen, maybe 2,000 yen an hour. But he was making about 5,000 yen an hour.
That's incredibly different.
Yeah. So anyways, he said he was coming to Japan, and I was worried about would he be able to afford it as a nursing home worker from Iceland. And I was shocked when he told me that he was staying for a week in Tokyo in one of the best hotels, or best higher-end hotels. This hotel was, I think, about 70,000, 80,000 yen a night.
Wow, he could afford that.
That's what I couldn't believe. He could afford that, and he came to Japan, and Japan was very reasonable from him, coming from Iceland, where even though he earned the equivalent of 600,000 kroner a month, he was probably borderline, for the cost of living in terms of poverty levels, because the cost of living in Iceland is probably about the highest in the world.
That's incredible.
So, just to put things in perspective, the average person in Japan has an income about 5.6 million yen. So that's about $36,000. And the average person in Australia, well, I guess probably closer to $70,000. And in the U.S., I think it's also close to $70,000. But it doesn't really mean anything, because if you earn 5.5 million yen a year, it's only worth 35,000 in the U.S., and so you can't get by in the U.S. with 35,000. But because the cost of living is much cheaper in Japan, that's equivalent to probably about 55,000 U.S. So you're still not up to the average income in the U.S., but you still have quite a bit of purchasing power. So the average income in the U.S. is $70,000. The average income in Japan converted into U.S. is $55,000. So they still have more purchasing power in the U.S.
I see. Yeah. No wonder there's a lot of American tourists in Japan nowadays.
Well, I think that's the perfect story, and I might be getting a bit ahead of myself here, but just think about it. In '85, when we had the Plaza Accord, the yen went almost overnight from 240 to 120, and surprise, surprise, the number of Japanese tourists overseas went from 5 million in '85 to 10 million in '90 to 15 million in '95, and just recently, or until recently, in at least 2012, the yen was at 80. And now the yen is at 160. And it shouldn't be a surprise that the number of foreigners visiting Japan has gone from 10 million to 40 million. So everybody is playing that same game of getting the most purchasing power by deciding where to go and leverage off of their currency.
No wonder they're very happy here.
Yeah, and let me give you another example. I've seen these websites where people have these very detailed models, spreadsheets of where the cheapest place is to buy the Gucci or the Dior or the Chanel bag and what have you. And probably half the time it seems that Japan comes out as the cheapest in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
Even the luxury stuff?
Even the luxury stuff where you assume they basically maintain the same pricing globally.
I thought so.
But according to these charts, Japan is about 10 to 30% cheap, 20 to 30% cheaper than the U.S. And that, in many cases, is cheaper than going to Paris and buying it. And if you're in China, they have slightly higher tariffs on certain of those products. They have higher pricing. So obviously, you can understand why so many Chinese would want to come to Japan and leverage off of their RMB, because they can buy it first cheaper in Japan, and they can also enjoy skiing or something at the same time.
That explains all the Chinese tourists in buses at Ginza.
Yeah. And not only the Chinese tourists, it also explains the Australians in Niseko or Hakuba or Nozawa Onsen, and that's the other example. Or at Disneyland.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been to Disneyland in
Me
a long
neither.
time. Okay, but I do know from people who go that it's still about 10,000 yen a day. And that's what in dollars. What is that? That's like $70. In the U.S., it's probably about $150.
Oh wow.
And the same thing could be said for Universal Studios and skiing, which I which I still do, is probably, I think, on an expensive day, maybe between 8 and 10,000 yen. But if you ski in Vail or Aspen or Mont Tremblant or Whistler in Canada, you're going to be spending up to $250 a day.
Wow.
So 10,000 yen, which is about $80 $70 versus 250. So it's so much cheaper. So obviously a lot of Americans or Canadians will say, well, okay, if I spend a week in Canada, a week in Japan, at least I'll probably save maybe $700-800 on my lift tickets, and it's maybe and of course food will be cheaper, so it will be almost enough to offset the cost of the airfare. And at least I can enjoy myself and maybe bring back a few cheap products duty-free over at the same time. And overall, I'll probably come slightly ahead or even.
No wonder they're coming over to Japan instead of all those great ski places that you mentioned.
So, but we have to look at things another way.
Sure.
And that is the quality of life, or actually the incomes for Japanese right now compared to what they were before. And in terms of poverty level, when I came to Japan in '87, the average poverty level, I think, was about 12% of the population.
I see.
And now it's about 16%.
Oh, wow.
So that's like 20 million people. So for those 20 million people and a lot more as well that are living very close to the poverty level, it's a very, very difficult situation with quite a lot of hardships.
Why has the poverty level risen?
Well, basically, before I talk about where it's gone, I think I probably should talk about what we mean by poverty.
Sure.
And when we talk about the poverty level, it's basically half of the average level. That's the definition in Japan. So, for example, if you were single, that would be about 2.4 million yen. If you were a family of 4, that would be about 3.6 million yen. And that's not a lot of money. Can you imagine? If you had an income of 2.4 million yen in Japan, that would probably be a little over 2 million after tax.
I don't know how to live like that.
Yeah, well, even if you had 2.4 million and no tax, that's like $15,000.
Right.
So I don't know many places in North America or Europe, for that matter, that you could live on $15,000 a year.
No.
And in Japan, even in Tokyo, or probably not central Tokyo, but even greater Tokyo, you can still get apartments for maybe 80,000 yen a month. But 80,000 yen a month means you're spending close to 1 million yen a year in rent. So that's basically half of your income in rent.
Right.
Think about what you could get for that in Hong Kong or Paris or New York or many other states. It would be impossible to get basically a room, let alone an apartment.
I guess no wonder there's a lot of people sharing rooms outside Japan these days.
I think that's a trend that's unfortunately getting more prevalent. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, Japan poverty level is basically about, again, like I said, about 3.6 million yen for a family of 4. But to give you a perspective, in Australia, the poverty level is about, I think, about $64,000 a year. So that's like 7 million yen.
Oh, wow.
And here in Japan we say 3.6, and in Australia they say 7. That's again the same thing about purchasing power parity. Things are so much more expensive in Australia than in Japan that you would have to earn at least $65,000 or so just to get to the poverty level in Australia.
So I guess with that, if you earn that little, I guess that's not enough to support oneself in retirement.
No, it's not enough to support. It's not enough to support oneself in retirement. Basically, we have to think of what constitutes the wealth of the average person. So we talked a bit about housing. We talk a bit about pensions, and we talk about one's overall financial assets. And normally your biggest financial asset is your house. Right. And in Japan, unfortunately, we've had 25 years of deflation, at least until 2020. That meant that the equity that people had built up in their houses in Japan was rather minimal. Many people right after the 10 years after the bubble had burst were still sitting on losses on their houses. And the CPI, the Consumer Price Index in Japan, between 1995 and 2020 went from I think a little over 96 to 100. Okay. So what I'm saying is that prices by their index only increased 4% over 25 years.
That's very little.
Very little. And even as things have accelerated since 2020, the price index is now about 113, 114. You can see that the prices have increased more than threefold in the last 5-6 years of what they did over the previous 25 years.
Wow, it must be more difficult for people to support themselves with the inflation finally happening.
Well, there's twofold. It has been difficult for people to acquire assets and wealth through their house, and it's harder now with people that aren't on the housing ladder to acquire wealth because they're suffering from inflation. And again, to give you the example, again, I talked about deflation in Japan. Basically, the average household has only about 20 million yen in equity in their house in Japan. That compares to about $750,000 in Australia. So the comparison is incredible. And you also is only about 38, 39, where, when you think of your wealth, what's your major source of wealth?
I guess your salary?
Your salary, but probably your house if you own a house. And at least your sustainable wealth. And so Japan, you have your house, you have your pension, other financial investments. And Japan, unfortunately, has had, again, about 25 years of deflation between 95 and 2000. And the average CPI, only went up 4 or 5%. And the average home equity was probably negative for the first 10 years after the bubble burst in 90. So as a result of that, today, your average homeowner only has about 20 million yen in built-up equity in their homes. So then you think, okay, well, just as a comparison, by the way, in Australia, people joke when you ask them, "Do you have a good retirement plan?" You say, "Yeah, I own my house," because their house is their retirement plan. They'll live in their house. Once they get to 65, they'll downsize, they'll sell their house, and that will give them enough money to continue on in retirement. But in Japan, the average home equity is only about 20 million yen, 25 million yen. So you have to look at other financial resources, and you have to look at pensions, and you have to look at savings and what have you. And so if you look at savings or pensions, Japan's pension system, managed by GPIF, is about 500 trillion yen. It was started in 1961, and there's about 67 million people that belong to that. GPIF is part of it. That's the National Pension Service. But again, if you divide that by 67 million people and 300 million, which is the national pension, that's only about 5 million yen a person. Right. So it's not very much. And there's about 8 million people in Japan who belong to company pensions, and those company pensions are actually doing pretty well. They're worth about 20 million yen each. Okay. So, but that's only about 15% of the Japanese population that is well enough off to have a company pension. If you've got home equity, that's assuming you own a house, because only 60% of Japanese own a house or apartment. That's not enough. And if you depend on a pension, 5 million yen is not enough, at least for the people that aren't fortunate enough to work for some of the better Japanese companies.
Right.
In response to that, Japan has tried to come up with other plans. And you might recently have heard of NISA. Have you heard of NISA?
Oh, yeah.
So NISA, we've had that for I think 20, 30 years, and it used to be extremely limited. It used to allow you a maximum of lifetime investment of 6 million yen. This is after tax. So
wow.
you after you've paid your taxes, then you can pay up to I don't remember what it was, maybe. I don't know, 10, 20. Well, right now it's much better, but it was a limited amount every year. But the maximum was 6 million a year.
That's
and
little.
It's little. And then they raised it to 8 million. And so we had this big change in 24, at the beginning of 24, where they raised it to 18 million yen.
Oh, wow.
And 3.6 million per year. So as a result of that, the NISA accounts, I think they rose from like 20 million to 29 million, which it sounds impressive, right? And there's almost 100 trillion yen in NISA accounts.
Yeah.
But it's impressive until you remember that 29 million or about 100 trillion divided by 20 million is just a little over 3 million yen, right? So it's kind of, it's not that great.
Okay.
So, if you think about the other plans that they have overseas, you can't help but think of places like Australia that have what they call a superannuation fund.
What is that?
Well, it's basically like a U.S. 401k, and it was only started in '92. But what it does is it gives employers an incentive to contribute to their employees' pension plan, and people that work at the company to contribute to their own plan. And I think you contribute almost 20% of your salary can be contributed towards your pension.
That's pretty big.
That's pretty big. And of course, like a 401k, the big advantage is that what employees, when they give it to their pension, they're allowed to pay pre-tax. Do you understand the advantage?
Could you explain?
Well, I mean, if you're allowed to buy NISA Rowland after tax, of course we had the problem at 25 to 56 where it was a bit strange when I talked about the average Australian being 38 or 39, and we had a screen go black at 5, 3 o'clock to 53 to 10, but I guess there's nothing we can do about that, so otherwise it's fine. Unfortunately, I got a few numbers wrong in my explanation, which is frustrating. These rates are much more advantageous. The superannuation fund is much more advantageous than any kind of NISA fund or anything like that. And as a result, I think the last time I looked, they had like 4.2, 4.3 trillion dollars, Australian dollars, in that superannuation fund, which is about, I don't know, 225,000 Australian dollars. And again, you have to remember that the average contributor is only about 38, 39 years old, and the average Japanese 49 years old. And typically, in that 11 years between 38, 39, 49, you'll probably double your pension assets. So whereas the average Japanese pension assets are 5 million yen, and the average pension assets in Australia are, again, about $230,000, but that will probably be $460,000 in the next 10 years if everything continues as it has. And then if you convert the fact that the Australian dollar is actually stronger now than the yen, you can see what an advantage their pension system offers them. And so they have they get a house. They have a house which has average $750,000 equity. They've got a pension plan which probably has an average of $230,000, probably be close to $500,000 when they retire. And they have other financial assets. So they're looking at a retirement probably close to $1 million if they've done well over their lifetime. Whereas the typical Japanese has maybe 5 million yen in the national pension program, if they're very lucky, 20 million yen in a company pension, and then they got other financial assets. So, as somebody from the finance industry, everybody is famously, they talk about the financial assets or financial wealth of Japanese individuals. And I think currently it's probably about, 2,300, 2,400 trillion yen, which sounds like a lot of money. It's actually about 19 million yen per person. And if you recall the numbers, I know I'm giving you a few numbers, so you can't calculate it. But so you got the national pension, you've got investments, you've got investment trusts, and if you subtract that away, it basically means that if you're the average Japanese, you have 19 million yen in financial assets. But of the 19 million yen, half of that is in cash.
Oh.
Doing nothing. And partly because there's no incentive to do anything, and also because they feel that if we have further depreciation, it's better just to keep it as cash. So you have a situation where half of Japanese financial assets are basically parked at the bank, and probably more accurately parked at the Bank of Japan.
Okay.
Because the Bank of Japan pays the banks, the city banks, and the regional banks to keep their money at the bank. So this is money that's basically doing nothing. It's basically being kept in a safety chest. So you have a situation where, looking all things considered, I don't think that the average Japanese person is that well off, certainly compared to the way they were 30 years ago.
I mean, if they're keeping it in the bank, then I guess it's not doing a lot. Why don't they increase the proportion of the cash that's being used for investment? That would make more pension owners, I guess they would have more amount in return, right?
Well, I think they're kind of risk averse, and until recently. Until the last few years, actually until Abenomics, there was people generally losing money on a lot of their equities. They were worried about their losing household equity in their homes. And it's only recently that people have started to get excited about investing. But again, even with NISA and the new NISA allowing for further investment and trying to encourage further investment, of those 29 million funds, on average, they put in about 500,000 yen last year. Compared to their maximum annual allowance of 1.8 million. So there's still a very high risk adversity in Japan.
I see.
Yeah. I'm not trying to say that Japan is definitely poorer than it was in the past, but you can't measure wealth or rich or poor simply in terms of financial terms, right?
How do you measure it then?
Well, I think you have to basically think of, quality of life, quality of education, lifespan, healthcare, safety, and security. So there's a lot of intangibles that you also have to consider that would mean that even though Japan has fallen significantly in the financial rankings and certainly the wealth rankings globally, in terms of those intangibles, it's still, I think, probably one of the best countries, if not the best in the world.
I guess, is that why Japanese people are still pretty happy with their financial situation, despite their declining purchasing power parity?
I don't really think they're happy with their financial situation, and I think there's a lot of anecdotal things that we can look at to show how Japanese are kind of like, in a way, they're being forced to become more insular because they don't have that purchasing power parity that allows them to go overseas like they did before. There's still a few more people going overseas than before, but for example, until 5-6 years ago, we'd have over 1.5 million people go to Hawaii every year.
Right.
And I think in the most recent years, the highest has been like 900,000. Why is that? Because basically people used to budget maybe 200,000 yen for a 1-week holiday in Hawaii. That was maybe when the currency was close to parity. Inflation has gone up a lot in Hawaii. The yen is down, 40-50% in the last few years. And so that same vacation is going to cost you 350,000 yen or more. So they're just not doing it. And for me, one of the sad examples is education. During the bubble, or when the bubble burst, I think the Japanese were sending over 55,000 Japanese students to higher education in the U.S. And Korea was only maybe about 35,000. And remember, Korea is half the size of Japan. Today, Japan sends about 26,000 people to the U.S. for education. Korea sends 45,000.
Oh, wow.
Almost double, and again, it's half the size. So these kind of things make one think that Japanese are not able to exercise the economic strength that they had before. And I seem to remember in the 90s, after that, you wouldn't remember it, but we had the Asian financial crisis in '97. And currencies like the won became very weak, and it was very common for Japanese to go spend the weekend in Seoul, go on a shopping trip, and that continued on into the 2000s. But if you look at recent data for travel between Korea and Japan, you'll see that there's about 3 million Japanese that go to Korea every year. You know how many Koreans come to Japan?
Probably way more.
9 million.
Wow.
And remember, they're less than half the Japanese population. So that's the perfect example of purchasing power parity in action. Because you can get a lot more for your money in Japan with the Korean won than you can get for the Japanese yen. And that goes back to what I mentioned to you earlier, is that, remember at the beginning when we were talking, I was saying that the average income in Korea when I came to Japan was 5,500 yen. Was it 5,500? Sorry, $5,500, and the average income in Japan was about $22,000. The minimum wage again was 500 yen. The minimum wage in Korea when I came to Japan was about 100 yen. In the interim, the minimum wage in Japan has risen to about 1,200, 1,250 yen. The minimum wage in Korea is about 1,350 yen.
So are you trying to say that the Japanese are not as rich as...
Well, they're certainly not as rich as before on a power purchasing parity basis. Whether they're rich in terms of financial terms, I think is quite separate and nuanced, in terms of whether Japanese people are well off, because it's not just the financial returns or your income that measures wealth. It's basically the quality of life that you have, quality of education, the quality of health care, security, safety, and things like that. And on those measures, I think Japan is still probably the best in the world. But certainly in terms of purchasing power parity, as you can see from the examples that I've given you, Japan is suffering, and it's forcing Japanese to travel less and less and become, in a way, more insular. The example before, I told you a bit about, I think, about how strong purchasing power parity Australians have, and I think Japanese could understand that, because if you've ever skied in Hakuba or Nozawa Onsen or Niseko, you're just amazed by the number of foreigners, particularly Australians, that are coming here, and it's basically because they get such good value for their money by coming to Japan.
Okay, so you've discussed about how Japan's purchasing power parity has been declining. What would you propose to remedy the situation?
Well, I think to start with, you have to remember that about 10 to 20% of Japanese people are being paid at the minimum wage or close to the minimum wage level, and this is much higher than in the U.S., where I think it's close to 5 or 6%. So you have to raise their minimum wage to by at least 50% to 1,800 yen or more. And there's many reasons for that. But I think that the major reason is because you cannot expect people to survive, and basically you have to give people a certain dignity, but from the income that they're deserving, a minimum wage, which they can actually live on. In the U.S., there's 23 states, I think, in the U.S. that have a minimum wage of $17, which is 2,700 yen. I think the bigger part of it is the moral hazard, and I don't know, maybe aren't familiar with the expression of the moral hazard.
How would you explain that?
Well, moral hazard is basically a policy which brings about an undesirable result. In the case, let me give you an example.
Sure.
Okay. In the case of Japan, between the 90s and 2010, we had what we call an output gap. We were producing much lower than our capacity as an economy, and as a result, we had deflation. Part of that was the trajectory left over from the bubble economy, where investment was going like this, and all of a sudden demand collapsed. So that was the first 10 years. And then in '99, Japan instituted the zero interest rate policy, which made money very cheap. And as a result of that, it basically let companies that really didn't deserve to continue to exist continue to produce. But they weren't so much focused on their profitability. They were just trying to cover their costs and cover their fixed costs. So they were producing in many cases below marginal costs. They just wanted to, if they could cover part of the depreciation, part of the head office costs, but at least increase their utilization from 60 to 80%, then they were happy. And this is what we familiarly call the zombie companies. But because there were so many zombie companies that were still allowed to produce, that further aggravated the deflation for another 10 years. So this is what I mean by a moral hazard. In the case of the labor market, when we are paying people so low, we are encouraging people to do things that are labor intensive. We're encouraging them to do things labor intensive. We're discouraging them from investing in their own employees, because if you pay your own employee a lot, you're going to invest a lot of time in terms of education so that they're more efficient, more productive.
Right.
If you have lower salaries, then you say, well, I can pay these people at 1,200 yen, but guess what? We've got people from Indonesia and China and Vietnam that are going to come to Japan, and they'll be happy to get 1,200 yen an hour, because their minimum wage back home is between 200 and 400 yen. So we're acting in a very negative way in terms of keeping the wages low, and so people that want to work in Japan are being forced to do one or two jobs just to get by because the wage levels are so low. The other side of this coin is that it's causing Japan to be less productive, less efficient. You probably don't remember it, but when I first came to Japan, one of the things that just stunned me was the fact that you go to most department stores and they always had these elevator ladies. Are you familiar with elevator ladies?
I don't remember that. Can you explain?
All department stores had a woman who stood in the elevator, and she was just asking you what floor you wanted, and she'd push the button, and then you'd wait for her to push the button so that you could go to the next floor.
They paid people to do that?
They paid people to do that.
Wow.
And of course, obviously, all the train station had people with the punch cards, punch things, and they were punching those tickets, and you saw like 1 million little punches at the end of the day.
Wow.
And that's really inefficient. But if you're paying people 1,200 yen an hour, you might still want to have the elevator lady around. But the negative side of that is that if there is a very low cost for human capital, then there's very little incentive for people to invest in real capital. And my favorite example is robots.
Okay.
When I was an analyst and I would go visiting usually auto plants or electronic plants, you would see some automation. And the first question you would ask is, so what is the cost or the break-even point before you can introduce this new piece of machine? And they would say, well, this piece of machine currently saves me 2.5 laborers. If it can save me three laborers or more, so the annual depreciation costs of that machine are equivalent to 3 people's salary, then I will start to introduce more. But if you have lower salaries, then obviously there's less incentive to get new automation, right? And so it's a terrible shame, but in 2010, Japan was the most automated, had the highest level of robots in the world, which was about 30 robots per 1,000 workers. And now it's about 40 robots per 1,000 workers. Now it's about 400. But Japan was the top in the world in 2010. Now it's the 4th. Korea, Singapore, China all have more robots per worker than Japan. And that's probably because there's the moral hazard at work where people are thinking, well, I don't need to introduce this robot or what have you, because I can just get 3 or 4 people to do that for the same job. And that's not just in manufacturing, that's in agriculture and many other fields as well. So, where you see these completely automated hydroponic plants and what have you, that's showing you that in these countries it's expensive to have cheap labor, so we just should automate as much as possible. But there's less of an incentive to do that, and same thing with agriculture as well.
I see. So raise the minimum wage?
So raise the minimum wage is definitely one. And then the other issue, of course, is we have the NISA. It's not an ideal program. And like I said, in many countries, people are encouraged to contribute to NISA through pre-tax income rather than after-tax income. So it could be improved. But the bigger issue, I think, is housing. And you have to remember, in Japan, only about 60% of people own their house. And in the US and Canada, Australia, it's about 66%. And you might say it's not a really big deal. But remember, the average person in Japan is about 49, 50 years old. The average person in these countries is less than 40. And obviously, there's usually a much higher home ownership level the older you get. So the numbers are actually a bit worse. And the reason I say that is that there's been many studies in Korea, in Taiwan, and Japan showing a higher level of satisfaction with life, happiness, health, both physical and mental health, by owning a home. Renters are generally less happy, have worse mental health, and are generally not as well off as people that own their own house. And I said that Japan had 60%. You know what the home ownership is in Taiwan?
What could it be?
85%.
Oh, wow.
You know what it is Singapore?
They have houses, so they own houses in Singapore?
Well, they own apartments mainly, but it's 90%.
90%, wow.
And so the government in Singapore has a public housing program where you live in the house, and after a certain time you get the right to buy the house. So all I'm saying is that people are happier because they feel more secure about their future, and as a result they probably spend more as well. And Japan really has to address this issue, because if we continue over the next 10, 15 years, it's fine to promote inflation, but if there's a whole group of younger people who aren't able to own their own homes over the next 10 to 20 years, then their mental health, their physical health, their sense of well-being and happiness, I think, is going to deteriorate quite significantly. And not only that, I mean, Japan is famous for having a very low birth rate.
Oh, yeah.
And I think part of the reason also is because there's lower home ownership. The people in Japan, 40% of people, men under 40, are not married. And in other countries like the US and Canada, I think it's about 35%. And again, I think if you own a house or you intend to own a house or apartment, you're much more likely to be considering marriage. And if you're a prospective wife or what have you, you might be the one who owns a house. It could be either one. You're also much more likely to consider marrying that person because you feel there's more stability in the relationship. So this is something that Japan really has to promote. And I keep thinking we should have like a 35 for 35 plan.
What could that be?
Well, basically, anybody that's under 35 years old should get complete a tax exemption on their interest rate payments for their house or apartments. And that would encourage more house ownership or home ownership in Japan. Because if we don't do that, we're going to see more and more young people priced out of the market, and it's going to affect the Japanese society in much more ways than simple home ownership. It's going to affect them in terms of physical health, mental health, and general overall satisfaction. And the other, part of that housing issue, I think, is like we've seen this trend in the U.S. where private equity is buying, huge loads of housing, 10, 20,000 units. Well, maybe not 10, but 1 or 2,000 units at a time. And the reason they're doing it is that because there's a positive carry. And when I say positive carry, I mean the cost of interest is less than their rental yield that they can expect. So they will, if they borrow money to buy a group of apartments, they'll get a very good yield on that. And that's great as an investment, but for normal Japanese, it's just going to mean that they're going to have more and more renters that are going to be paying more and more foreign owners for their apartments.
I see.
So this is one area that they're addressing in the U.S. to try to regulate, and I think we'll have to regulate it in Japan as well.
Okay. So to conclude this episode, I guess you've brought out the topic of purchase power parity, how it's declined in Japan, and how we could ameliorate that through increasing minimum wage, perhaps improving the NISA program we mentioned briefly, and also including increasing home ownership. That seems like a pretty interesting starting point for a podcast.
Great. Well, I hope it was some help to you, and I'm glad that we could continue our informal discussion on a more formal basis.
Sure. And I'm sure it was pretty useful for our listeners too. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation again.
Look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.